Imagine opening the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, and noticing something that goes unnoticed by many. Two different stories about the creation of human beings, both present in the opening pages of Scripture. But why would God have created two different types of human beings? This is one of the most intriguing questions that has fascinated theologians, historians, and biblical scholars for centuries. What at first glance seems to be merely a poetic repetition begins to reveal curious details, almost as if they were records of two distinct events, written by different hands or with different purposes. In chapter 1, man and woman are created together as part of a grand project. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Male and female, he created them. It's a grandiose, universal, almost cosmic statement describing a collective, symbolic human being made in the divine image. But in chapter 2, the tone changes. The creation becomes intimate, personal, almost artisanal. A man is formed from the dust of the earth. A garden is carefully planted. A woman is shaped from a rib. It's no longer a universal story, but a particular one, with names of places, dialogues, and meticulous details. How can we explain these two versions? Were the biblical authors leaving us clues to a deeper truth? Could there really have been two creations, two beginnings, and two types of humanity? Get ready. In the journey ahead, we'll trace the steps of these two stories, as if unearthing ancient scrolls and revealing secrets kept since the beginning of time. You'll never see Genesis the same way again. Now that we're entering the mysterious realm of the two creations, an inevitable question arises. Why do chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis present such different narratives? Are we dealing with contradictions or hidden layers of meaning? In chapter 1, the creation follows an almost mathematical order. There's a divine rhythm structured over 6 days, as if God were conducting a cosmic symphony. First the light, then the heavens, the waters, the earth, the animals, and finally the human being. Man and woman are created together as the crown of creation. But in chapter 2, everything changes. The tone is poetic, yes, but personal. God doesn't just speak. He acts with his hands. He forms the man from the dust, plants a garden in Eden, forms the woman from the man's rib. Here the man appears alone in a world still unfinished. These differences have led scholars to ask, could there be two different authors? Ancient Jewish traditions, for example, speak of two main sources for Genesis, the Elohist and the Yahwist, each with its own style, theological vision, and way of describing the divine. A transcendent God in chapter 1, a close and personal God in chapter 2. But some go further. Certain mystics and interpreters dare to suggest that these are not just different versions of the same story, but two distinct events. The first, the creation of a collective human, a spiritual species in God's image, perhaps even androgynous. The second, a physical, earthly creation with limitations, passions, pains, and the capacity to err. These ideas cause unease. What if they were true? What if Adam and Eve were not the first humans, but the first of a second type of humanity? Could there have been beings before them, another people not from Eden? The questions only grow, and the curtain of mystery begins to slowly lift. Because the difference between the two texts is not just literary, but points to a profound, perhaps intentional, perhaps revelatory division. But there's a detail many overlook, one directly tied to the name used for God in each story, a name that could change everything we think we know about the origin of humanity. Have you ever noticed that in the two creation accounts in Genesis, the names for God change? This is no small detail. In chapter 1, the Creator is called Elohim, but in chapter 2, he is called Yech Elohim, or, as we usually read in Portuguese, Lord God. What does this mean? Why such a significant change? Mark this word, Elohim. It is plural. Yes, plural, and it's shrouded in mystery. In Hebrew, it can indicate majesty or supreme power, but it also raises an unsettling question. Why use the plural for a supposedly singular God? This alone is an invitation to mystery and speculation. In chapter 1, it's Elohim who creates everything with words. He speaks, and it happens. A cosmic God, almost distant, who doesn't physically engage with creation. A supreme, universal, almost impersonal being. But in chapter 2, the text begins to use Yahweh Elohim, the personal and sacred name of God revealed to Moses. This God acts with his hands, forms the man from clay, plants a garden, breathes the breath of life. He walks in the garden, speaks directly to Adam. He's an intimate, almost human God. Two names, two ways of acting, two styles of creation. What if we weren't just facing a theological difference, but two entities? Several ancient texts, including certain Gnostic and apocryphal writings, suggest that Elohim and YHWH could be different manifestations of the same being, or even two beings with different roles in creation. One a cosmic creator, the other an earthly creator. One a god of totality, the other a god of human experience. Other scholars dare even further. They associate Elohim with a broader concept, almost like a divine collectivity, hence the plural. Meanwhile, YHWH would represent a more direct and intimate expression tied to the experience of the Hebrew people. But what if we were talking about a transition? What if the human created by Elohim in chapter 1 was part of a spiritual creation, while the mold made by YHWH in chapter 2 was something physical, carnal, earthly? This could explain not only the differences in the narrative style, but also in the essence of the characters. Would Adam then be the first material human being? And would the humans of chapter 1 be beings of another dimension, perhaps invisible to our eyes, arcane spirits? This begins to make sense when we look at how the human being is described in each part, because in chapter 1 they are created in the image of Elohim. But in chapter 2, the image is no longer mentioned. Genesis 1:27 gives us a seemingly simple phrase, but with an almost unfathomable depth. God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. But what does this mean exactly? Now that we're immersed in this mystery, I invite you to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any future revelations. Hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell to follow every step of this spiritual and intellectual journey we're taking together. In this verse, the term man comes from the Hebrew Adam, which can be translated not as a proper name, but as humanity, a collective. This completely changes the reading. We're no longer dealing with the creation of a single person named Adam, but of an entire humanity, created simultaneously, man and woman together, without individual protagonism. A plural, complete human race emerges in the image and likeness of the divine. But wait, there's no mention of the Garden of Eden, no dust, rib, or serpent. These humans of chapter 1 are not located in a defined geographical space. They are blessed and given a mission: be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. It's a grandiose, almost universal vision. Now imagine if this story were a description of the creation of an archetypal humanity, a type of spiritual beings not limited by the physicality of Eden, but spread across the entire earth. This is a recurring idea in Jewish mystical traditions, like the Kabbalah, and even in Gnostic texts. For many of these mystics, the first humans were not of flesh, but of light. Other scholars suggest that this would be the creation of the first human race before Adam and Eve, a forgotten lineage, possibly extinct or perhaps still existing, hidden among us. This could explain, for example, the famous question from Cain after killing his brother Abel: "Whoever finds me will kill me." But who would these others be if the only humans were his parents? Perhaps the humans of Genesis 1 were not just symbolic, but real and different. different from Adam, different from Eve, different from us. Furthermore, the text doesn't say that God formed these humans from the dust of the earth. They were simply created in a direct divine act, almost as if they emerged from light, from the Word, from the very breath of divine essence. So why create another humanity afterward? Why the need for Adam and Eve? Why a new beginning in chapter 2? These questions lead us to one of the most controversial passages in the Bible. When we enter the creation of Adam, we're no longer talking about a collective. We encounter a solitary man, a being formed separately, isolated, within an enclosed garden. While Genesis 1 presents man and woman created together as part of a collective humanity, in chapter 2, everything changes. Now God, or rather YHWH Elohim, decides to form the man from the dust of the earth, not with words, but with his hands, an almost intimate, artisanal act. And then he breathes into his nostrils the breath of life. But here's the unsettling detail. The man, unlike the previous collective creation, appears alone. The text says there was not yet a man to till the ground. In other words, there was a practical, almost agricultural need. Eden is not the world. It's an enclosed garden, a controlled, separate space. Adam is placed there to care for that special place. It's not just a divine creation, it's the appointment of a guardian. And after some time comes the creation of the woman, but in a very peculiar way, not from nothing, as in Genesis 1, but from the rib of an already existing man. This already shows a pattern. Adam is the reference. Eve is shaped from him. It's as if God were now creating something different, something that needs a foundation, an internal, pre-existing model, not an external one. This highly detailed and almost intimate narrative contrasts with the previous cosmic creation. Here we have names, relationships, emotions. Adam speaks, names the animals, feels loneliness. God notices, interacts, responds. We're facing a more personal but also more dramatic story. And this difference raises an important question. Why create a new human couple if man and woman already existed before? After all, in chapter 1, humanity had already been created, blessed, and sent to populate the earth. So, would Adam and Eve be a second creation, a new lineage distinct from the previous one? Some scholars suggest that Adam and Eve were not the first humans, but the first chosen humans, with whom God decided to establish a specific relationship. Others go even further and say they are the first material humans in a world already full of other beings, the children of the previous creation. This brings us back to Cain, who, after killing his brother, fears being killed by others. But who are these others, and where did they come from? It all starts to make sense when we consider the possibility of two human lines, one spiritual, collective, dispersed, the other physical, conscious, limited, but chosen. But if Adam is this new beginning, what did ancient scholars say about it? Do these two creations have clues in the oldest manuscripts? Over the centuries, rabbis, priests, mystics, and scholars have debated this question with an almost feverish intensity. Could there be two different types of human beings created at different times? This theory, though controversial, is not new. Various strands of ancient Jewish and Christian thought, especially among the mystics of the Kabbalah and the Gnostics of the early centuries, addressed this idea as a key to interpreting the mysteries of Genesis. According to these scholars, the first account in Genesis refers to the creation of Adam Harishon, the primordial man, that is, spiritual beings created in God's image in their essence. These would not be made of flesh and bone, but of pure light of consciousness scattered across the world, perhaps even immortal. The second story in Genesis 2, on the other hand, would introduce the creation of a new type of humanity, the carnal beings, molded from matter. Adam would be the first of this new lineage, Eve, the first companion, a more limited project but also a more personal humanity, capable of erring, suffering, and redeeming itself. This interpretation is reinforced by the observation of the Hebrew words used in the texts. In chapter 1, the verb used for creating is bara, which means to create from nothing, a pure divine act. In chapter 2, the verb changes to yatsar, which means to mold, to shape with hands like a potter shapes clay. Two acts, two different ways of creating. Ancient rabbis suggested that the first creation is spiritual and that the Adam of Eden is clothed in flesh. In the Kabbalah, the man of chapter 1 does not fall with original sin because he was not material. The man of chapter 2, however, is subject to desire, illusion, and death. And what do the Gnostics say? In texts like the Gospel of Thomas or the Apocryphon of John, the creation of the material world is seen as the work of a demiurge, a lesser creator who imprisons divine souls in bodies of clay. This idea, though radical, suggests that spiritual humans were downgraded to flesh, losing their original nature. Some go even further and propose that the humans of Genesis 1 are still among us, not physically, but in another form, beings of light, of another dimension, observers, perhaps even invisible guides. Meanwhile, we, the descendants of Adam, live in the world of matter, pain, and redemption. But now, after all this, what remains? Perhaps the great secret of Genesis is this: there wasn't just one creation, but two, and both still live within us. We carry the divine spark of the beings of light and, at the same time, inhabit bodies of clay subject to time and death. The true spiritual journey is the reconnection with our origin, the remembrance of who we are, and the rebuilding of the bridge between heaven and earth. May this mystery inspire us to seek the light that dwells within us.